So yesterday, I just watched Avengers Endgame for the first time in years, and I just want to say it is a beautiful combination of all of the MCU and a beautiful conclusion to one of the greatest arcs and greatest cinematic universes that we will ever see. You're going to hear a lot of talk about the decline that came post Endgame, and I think it was only natural because this is some of the best that we could possibly get from superhero media. In terms of the way that it brings everything together, I think it's going to be quite a while until we get something of this capacity. One of the greatest aspects of this movie is the emotional weight. I think the decision to have a time skip of 5 years was perfect, especially because when Infinity War was announced, it was announced that Endgame would be coming out a year later. So it was already common speculation that all of the heroes would lose or die in some capacity in the first film, and that they would spend the second film undoing what was done by Thanos. And of course, that is what happened, but the 5-year time skip gives an actual weight not only to this movie, but to the future of the MCU. So to start off, we have the remaining Avengers traveling to where Thanos is resting so they can retrieve the Infinity Stones and undo what he did. When they see that that's impossible, Thor furiously chops off Thanos' head. That's a hell of a way to kick off this film, because obviously the MCU is known for being a little cookie cutter when it comes to the violence. It's so amazing how Thor is serious here, and then he immediately goes back to being silly in his next standalone movie. I absolutely adore the scene where he summons Stormbreaker and Captain Marvel doesn't flinch, and he's just like, alright, yeah, I like this one, let's go. But his anger with his failure is solidified when he chops off Thanos' head, because that is putting an end to that arc. It's saying that there's no way to undo this failure, at least we're not going to learn it from him, so he just has to die and let it be done with. Following that, we get the time skip, and we get to see what is happening with all of these characters. I love the detail of Black Widow coordinating with Rocket and the Dora Milaje and Captain Marvel so that they can make sure a tragedy like what happened with Thanos can never happen in the universe again. Also, I can't understand why they didn't keep this look for Captain Marvel in her next solo film or the next film with her called The Marvels. This is easily her best look. Anyway, we get to see Natasha is still in the facility, basically where they left off, struggling with this failure. And not only that, but she's seeing her friend in Hawkeye, Clint Barton, become a brutal murderer trying to cope with his loss. There are so many details like that, and I feel like all of the cast was acting their ass off for this movie. They understood the emotional weight that their characters are supposed to be feeling. So there are moments like that are balanced with a little bit of the silliness, because we get Paul Rudd's Ant-Man being rescued from the quantum realm by a rat. So Ant-Man proposes his plan to the Avengers concerning how to go throughout time and potentially undo what Thanos has done. And when they go to Tony with his plan, he's just like, nah, I'm out. I got my wife, I got my beautiful child, I got this nice little home removed from all of the nonsense. I did my best, and my best wasn't good enough. I'm out. Obviously, we know he's not going to stay there because that's freaking Iron Man, but it's a great detail for him to have started this family and to realize that all of his superhero antics can't save everybody, at least not initially. But when he dwells on it and comes to this reality that he has a chance to help the world, he's going to take it. So after saying that he's not on board in the first place, he does go back to the Avengers with a plan for them to safely travel throughout the timeline and gather these stones. So about an hour in, this is where the Avengers are finally traveling back throughout time, and this is where the film might come into a bit of a lull for some people. At least it did for me, but especially upon a rewatch, you realize that it was absolutely necessary in order to have the conclusion that it did. And in this portion, the directors do more of balancing the seriousness with the silliness, like when Tony, Cap, and Ant-Man go to retrieve the Space Stone and the Mind Stone. The seriousness comes in with Captain America, where not once but twice he uses his knowledge of the future to get out of a bit of a sticky situation. Once in the elevator where he says Hail Hydra to pretend to be a Hydra agent and get the Mind Stone easily, and then again when he's facing his past self and he just says something about Bucky to distract him and get the upper hand. Even the detail of them going to a specific year where 3 Infinity Stones would be in New York at the same time is such an excellent showing of how they thought about how the details would play out. They tried to cover the ground that a lot of the nitpickers and super hardcore movie and fan nerds would try to find with their movie and logic. The silliness comes in where their plan to retrieve the Space Stone gets disrupted because Hulk has to take the stairs and the present day characters were just standing in the wrong place at the wrong time. Of course, that does give us an excuse to go even further back in time, which gives us a beautiful reuniting of Tony and his father. So it's forgivable. Also in this portion of the film, we have Nebula and War Machine going to a different point in time to retrieve the Power Stone. And this is where Thanos obviously becomes privy of the events that happen in the future and the fact that he eventually dies. I think not only Josh Brolin's acting of the character, but the decisions that the director decided to have Thanos take out is so in line with not only the character we've seen before in Infinity War, but what a logical, ruthless leader would do. He is thoughtful about it, and he has passed Nebula, infiltrate the Avengers, and make his way to the present day later in the film. He isn't rash in this case. He basically does what he's been doing for the entirety of the MCU in the background, being patient. And then of course we have Thor and Rocket going back to the events of Thor: The Dark World, one of the most forgettable MCU movies, in order to retrieve the Reality Stone. This is where I thought they should have had a bit more seriousness when it comes to Thor getting fat and being depressed and living with his failure. Obviously he has that conversation with his mother, which is very good, but especially earlier in the film with him just being a drunkard and yelling at children on Fortnite, I thought they could have taken that a little level deeper, especially when you know what they do with Thor in the subsequent appearance. It's not as fulfilling as I would have liked it to be. Right at the point where I was getting a little sick of spending all of this time in past movies and past timelines, we get to the 2-hour mark where all of the Infinity Stones from different points are assembled in the present day. I kind of selfishly wish that Bruce died from making the snap. Maybe they could have established that he altered the timeline in a different way than Thanos, and then that's what caused his death. But especially knowing what they do with his character in future projects, I wish he just died right here. I just want to say that I love the way that this movie looks. I absolutely despise the way that Avengers Age of Ultron looks. It just looks so gray and washed out, and it doesn't help that that movie is like a 2.5-hour commercial for other Marvel projects. But when it comes to the visual style and cleanliness of the Russo brothers MCU films, I just really enjoyed looking at them. So yeah, at the 2-hour mark, Hulk makes the snap and returns the life that Thanos wiped out from the universe previously. But this is also when Thanos makes his attack on the Avengers facility. And for the next 30 minutes, it's just non-stop, super gratifying action and beautiful storytelling and zipping around, and it was just so amazing. I just want to dive into every detail of this last battle. It is so awesome how Thanos just grabs his big ass sword and he sits on the wreckage and he awaits the arrival of those that are going to oppose him. And then Cap, Iron Man, and Thor come out of that wreckage and they're like, yo, he's just sitting here. Let's do what needs to be done. In that action sequence, we see even more about how formidable Thanos is without the stones. He is going toe-to-toe with the big three and he is whooping their ass. He's on the verge of murdering Thor before this awesome, goosebump-inducing scene where Cap finally picks up Mjolnir. I not only felt extreme hype watching this for the second time, but it just reignited all of the memories of the first time I saw this movie. It is so awesome to see Captain America, Chris Evans' Captain America, holding that hammer. The movie even gives that moment where the hammer rises and it travels in a direction opposite of Thor, and the whole audience knows what's coming. And then Captain America finally lifts it, and it gives you that other moment to soak in the glory of it. And then we have Cap straight giving Thanos combos with the shield and the hammer. Like, who would even imagine that this would be something I was watching on a movie screen? But even then, Captain America is just a human, and it's not enough. Thanos shatters his shield, and it's looking hopeless. But Steve picks up his gear, his broken shield, and he is fully prepared to die. That is when an even more beautiful scene occurs, with all of the portals opening and that grand scene of every army, every hero returning for this final battle. I forgot that it was Chadwick Boseman's Black Panther to be the first to step out of a portal, and he just gives Cap that knowing look like, yeah, we're back and we're ready. And then all of the heroes and all of the armies come out and they're posing and they're ready for battle, and it's them versus all of Thanos' army. And when they charge, the pure awesomeness just emerges on screen, and it's amazing. Throughout the battle, there are just endless reasons for the characters to demask, which I will always find hilarious. But we have the reunion between Peter and Tony. Then we have the reunion between Peter, Quill that is, and Gamora. I will always find that funny. But like I said, there are so many great moments in this final battle. Like when Wanda sees Thanos and she's like, "You took everything from me." And Thanos hilariously says, "I don't even know who you are." But she uses all of her power and all of her might. And even Thanos is convinced that she is going to kill him. That's why he commands his army to just fire on the battlefield indiscriminately. Somehow, some way, the Russo brothers found the perfect way for this battle to keep on escalating in awesomeness. Particularly when Captain Marvel arises and she just barrels through this massive warship like it is nothing to her. I can't forget to mention having Pepper Potts as Rescue in this film. That is so unnecessarily cool for this movie. It doesn't need that. There are obviously plenty of other characters, but it's just like, why not? My introduction to Rescue was in Iron Man Armored Adventures, that TV series that came out when I was a kid, and it is just so rewarding to see her in the suit, just shooting lasers all across the battlefield. They have that little scene where all of the female heroes gather up, and it was considered a little pandering at the time, but I don't think it's nearly as bad. I do wish that they just gave them an extended 2-minute sequence of them just ripping apart all of the army by themselves. But for the most part, at least to me, that was cool. I would love to know how women feel about that scene. But then following that, we see Captain Marvel going toe-to-toe with Thanos. And there's this just great detail of Thanos doing what makes the most sense when he rips the Power Stone from the glove to free it from Captain Marvel's grasp and then just hits her with like a nuclear punch. Then Tony and Strange just have this brief conversation after their heavy hitter just goes down. And it's like, listen, we know what needs to be done. And I felt it at the time. I know for a fact that the audience felt it about what was going to happen. They have a scramble for the gauntlet, but Iron Man eventually grabs the stones while Thanos is distracted. He absorbs all of the power of the stones, and then he gives that final "I am Iron Man" and makes the snap. There's this huge flash of blinding white light, and for a moment in the audience, at least the first time, and even now knowing what happened, I'm still like, oh my gosh, what's gonna happen? Like, who won? What's going to be the fallout? And then we slowly see Thanos' armies crippling, turning into dust, and just disappearing before his eyes. And Thanos just does this spin around, watching everything that he worked for come to a complete destruction. It is a beautiful scene where Thanos just sits down and he accepts his failure. But as soon as Thanos is gone, the audience knows that we now have to focus on what's happening with Tony, because they just made a huge point about the Hulk having to be the one to absorb the energy in the primary snap because he is already super strong and has exposure to gamma radiation. So now we go back to Tony, and he's sitting there with half of his body essentially singed off. The first person to come down and to see him is his best friend, James Rhodes. I don't know why Don Cheadle isn't in more of the MCU, by the way. He's amazing and I love every time he's on screen. But there's that knowing look between Tony and Rhodey and then everyone else that comes down, Pepper and Spider-Man and Cap and Thor, and it is just absolutely gut-wrenching. The full culmination of the MCU that started with Iron Man in 2008, 10 years prior to this film, 11 years actually. It started with him and it ended with him. The movie goes on to set up some things and put to bed some things. Of course, having a funeral for Tony, and then we see Captain America returning the stones, where he obviously decided to stay and live out his life and eventually return to this timeline. But of course, now he's aged up. We actually don't get much of the other Avengers, but they had a lot of projects lined up by that time already, so we knew that there was going to be more in the future. As far as conclusions go, I think this was amazing. Obviously, you can nitpick and you can find faults in anything, and this movie might even seem slightly worse when you know what is done in later films, but when you rewatch this and you absorb this in its full capacity for what it is and what it meant at the time, to describe it as anything but amazing would be a complete undersell. Just talking about this movie, if you can't tell, I am not as nearly as excited as I was for this film as I am for Doomsday. However, just seeing what was accomplished in this film and in Infinity War and the Russo brothers' other MCU projects, it does give me a lot of hope for what it could be and how they're going to treat those characters. There's obviously going to be an insane amount of hype between now and when that movie releases and the time after it's out, and people have had time to rewatch it multiple times in the theater because you know it's going to get a lot of repeat business. Whether or not the movie is actually good, it is still mind-blowing to get the Avengers, X-Men, and Fantastic Four in one film. Not too long ago, these characters were owned by different studios, and we were getting movies like Fan Four Stick and New Mutants. We still have a lot of nonsense going on over at Sony, but in terms of the MCU, I will say that even my highly critical brain is excited for what is to come. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, please share with me your thoughts, not only on what Avengers Endgame meant to you, but what the entirety of the MCU has meant to you, how you feel about it now, and what you're excited for in the future, because there's a lot on the slate. This has been Universe Altering. Thank you for tuning in, and join me in the next one.